You're listening to episode 11 of The Secular Buddhist. Today we talk with Will Davidson on his experiences having been a monk in a Tibetan tradition of Buddhism and the veracity and use of Enlightenment experiences. So sit back, relax, and have a, chocolate malt. I had one last night. That's what we should have. Chocolate malt. Many people have experiences that we would commonly call spiritual every day. They feel a deep connectedness as self drops away, and there is nothing between them and their direct involvement in the processes of life. A tremendous joy arises, incomparable to any previous feeling they've had, and this rapture not only lasts, but gives energy to the event's positive impact on their life. They feel, and outward observers often comment, transformed. But are these experiences real? Is the person actually connected to all things, or are their perceptions misleading? These questions become even more complicated as people attribute causes to the event from a particular view they have about life. We are utterly convinced, and no one can tell us differently, that we saw God, were touched by an angel, or experienced enlightenment. Interestingly enough, our explanations invariably match what's in our minds. Hindus don't see Jesus, and Baptists aren't visited by Ganesh. What we believe to be so may not be so, but that doesn't mean that these experiences can't be of positive benefit, as we'll see in our talk with Will Davidson. So, talking with Will Davidson today, I'd like to share with the audience that there was a Facebook post on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page, where occasionally I put out quotes, and one I had put out was a Steve Batchelor quote, and you can go take a look at this. It's on April 4th posting, and the Steve Batchelor quote is from Buddhism Without Beliefs, which is his book from, I think it's 2006 is when it came out, and he'd said, "It is no longer possible to maintain that Dharma practice has remained unaltered since the time of the Buddha. It has evolved and continues to evolve distinctive forms peculiar to the conditions of the time. It has survived precisely because of its ability to respond creatively to change." And a few folks are posting on this, and one of those is Will, who we're interviewing today. And he'd had just a magnificent statement that he'd put in there that I actually ended up quoting in my interview with Grant Steves. And Will had said, "I would advocate for a definition of enlightenment that encompasses optimal psychological functioning, and that acknowledges that the majority of optimal psychological functioning is the quality of our relationships with others. The other parts being the quality of our intrapsychic relationships and the quality of our relationship with our environment." And the thing that fascinated me, because that just was so beautifully worded, is that it really brings the experiences we have in our practice into, it's meaningless unless it's actually put into practice. So, Will, thank you so much for being here. Glad you're with us.
You're welcome.
So, tell us a little bit about what your background is growing up.
Well, my father was in the Air Force, so I spent the first couple of years in the Philippines. And one of my earliest memories is a sort of a kind of a spiritual experience when I was only like 2 years old. I was like standing in the surf in the ocean, and I looked down and I saw like a shell. And I went down and I grasped it, and when I opened my hand, it was a spiral shell. And I just felt this like incredible connection to like, existence at that point that, I've kind of carried with me since then. Growing up, well, first of all, my family were Congregationalists.
Mine too.
And we briefly went to church up until the age of when I was about 6 or 7. And my memories of that experience were just, them telling me like that Jesus was everywhere, and me, as a little kid, kind of wandering around the church and being scared to death that I was going to bump into him, around every corner. This tortured figure, with the spikes through his hand.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That was my sort of exposure to religion at the time. And then, for whatever reason, my family stopped going. My mother was kind of an agnostic. My father never really talked about religion. And so, for the most part, I was kind of left to my own devices, as far as figuring out things like about religion and existential stuff. So I think it was around about the age of 13 that I really had started having doubts about, the whole idea of a God. I think one of the reasons that I had doubt was just from a sense of personal integrity, because it seemed like the only time I ever really thought about a deity was when I was in pain or I needed something, and then I would be, doing beseeching prayers.
Yeah, what can he do for me?
Right, exactly, yeah. And to me, that just seemed so, just lacked integrity. And so from that moment on, I sort of, thought, well, there really isn't a God. And I think about a year later, I had, the courage to actually say that out loud to myself. And, all the while, looking for thunderbolts coming down from the sky.
and yet, I bet none arrived. And
Right. You're right. So, yeah, that's sort of an empirically based way to, to find that out. If there had been a God, maybe he should have given me a sign or something at that point of, doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't happen. So, I didn't have a particularly happy childhood. My father was kind of abusive. And then to get out of the house, I joined the Navy in 1976. I graduated high school in 75, and then I joined the Navy in 76. And actually, I found the whole boot camp experience to be very monastic. We were kind of isolated from the world. Most of the time was spent in the barracks. We didn't have any free time. And any other time that we were outside, we were probably marching. And I found that, I would fall into this kind of cadenced march, but at the same time, I would have to stay alert, for any commands to change direction or whatever. So I think for me, this was like a real walking meditation that I learned to do. And just being physically fit and the constant, walking meditation really kind of had a transformative effect on me. And I came out of boot camp very confident and happy person. Interestingly, right after that, I had a white light experience. I was feeling particularly happy that day, and I was just smiling at everybody. And I went to my barracks, and I sat down, and I decided to meditate. And I was meditating for a while, and when all of a sudden I had this feeling like my body was filled with iron filings, and a magnet was being passed from head to my toes. And after I had this physical experience, I said, to myself, wow, that was something else. And then as I opened my eyes, I saw this tiny little door opening up at the foot of the bed. It was like an invisible little door, and streams of light were coming out of it. And when it fully opened, it totally wiped out my vision, and I was totally seized by this white light. But that experience sort of created a problem for me, because I was a naturalist and an atheist, and yet I'm having this profound spiritual experience. So in a way, I felt sort of like I had this schism in me. I had the spiritual side, and I had this objective, rational side, and I couldn't find any common ground between them. I couldn't merge them. So this this idea of having a schism and, being uncomfortable with that, just kind of became a theme of my life and of a quest, to merge those two somehow. So I was in the submarine service and had a lot of great experiences in there. And then when I got out, I decided to go to college on the GI Bill. And all during this time, I was philosophizing in my own head and trying to create like a universal kind of metaphysical system that would eventually, resolve this kind of schism that I felt, in this kind of malaise that maybe life didn't have any meaning. But at a certain point, I came to realize that there's no way that reasoning was ever going to, get me out of this. I felt that really what I needed was some kind of change in perspective, and I realized, and I think this was a good realization from early on, that my malaise, the fault lay not with the universe, but lay with my own faulty perception of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And that if I could only, slightly change my perception, all these supposed, schisms and would resolve themselves. And, I remember kind of envisioning this as, just taking a step to the right and, looking at the landscape slightly different. So it was about that time that I was, while at UMass Amherst, that I was exposed to Taoism and Buddhism. In Zen Buddhism, especially as, a way of knowing that's not reliant on rationality, very much appealed to me, since I had pretty much given up on rationality for solving my problem. So after a year at UMass, having this burning desire, I dropped out of college, and I went to a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in New Jersey. And this monastery was founded by Geshe Wangyal, and he's the Mongolian monk mostly responsible for bringing Tibetan Buddhism to the United States. So I just showed up there. Well, actually, the professor for Far East Studies at Amherst College had recommended it. I really wanted to go to a Zen monastery, but he sort of offered this as sort of a halfway measure, and so I went, and what did I know? I went along with it. So I showed up at the monastery, and they welcomed me. And then I began. There was sort of a probationary period where they were going to kind of get the feel of me, and I was going to kind of get the feel of them, and then they would decide whether I could stay or not. And so, I started with the practice, of trying to be, a Buddhist monk. And I remember going to meditation in the morning. I remember Bakshi, which is what the other monks called Geshe Wangyal, having some little ceremonial piles of dirt and the American flag planted in one of them, because he was so happy to be over here. And to me, he seemed kind of childlike, and but I didn't feel like I was really getting anywhere with the meditational practice. And I thought that actually the meditational practice was kind of a very small part of what I was doing during the day. It was only in the morning, and for the rest of the day it was all manual labor. And at that time, they were turning the grounds into kind of a pastoral setting, so we were doing a lot of raking and pulling out stones and stumps and stuff like that.
Now, at that point, had you done any long meditation retreats where really it's 6 to 10 hours a day of meditation, or is this your first kind of foray into it, was becoming a monk where they just meditate in the morning?
Yeah, this was my first foray into it. I hadn't had any experiences of long meditations, but that's what I was really looking for, and what I was very motivated to do. But it's something that I wasn't finding. Looking back, I think I would have been better off at a Zen monastery, but I remember particular, one day, one of the monks came up to me and he asked me, well, do you think that Bakshi teaches anything? And, he kind of put me on the spot, and I kind of hedged, and I said, well, I think he teaches by example, right? And the monk who was the head monk was very satisfied with this answer. So a few days later, he came up to me and said that they would like me to, join as a monk, officially as a monk there. And again, I was kind of put on the spot because now I really had to make a decision.
Yeah. Okay, be one of us.
Yeah, right. So, feeling that I wasn't really finding what I was looking for there, I decided that that I was going to leave, that I wasn't going to become a monk. And maybe I generalized too far, because I also kind of came to the conclusion that if I was ever going to find enlightenment, or this, shift in perspective that I was looking for, that I was going to have to do it on my own. Now, that might have been a little bit out of proportion to, the actual events. Maybe I could have gone to a Zen monastery after that and found a totally different experience. But
yeah, where the focus is more on the meditative practice that you were looking for.
Exactly. But, I made that generalization. So over the next, several years, 10, 12, 15 years, I continued my philosophical practice, which, I've kind of come to realize was kind of a meditational practice on its own. For me, when I'm involved in like deep philosophical thought, it's a creative process. So I think during those times I'm very focused, and I'm also trying to activate, the kind of creative, intuitive side to make, leaps of insight, that'll get me, past certain philosophical problems. So I think over that time period that I was engaging in a daily meditational practice, which was this introspection and philosophy. And eventually I came to a time when I noticed in my mind this thing called, that I would call like an I. And, I started examining it more and more and really questioning if it was real. And it also occurred to me that this I looked, suspiciously like what, Christians would call a soul. I think I had kind of a vague impression that I looked upon it as kind of indivisible and abstract, and maybe even indestructible in the way that a soul was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that the early Buddhist texts talk about in jhana practice, which is what evolved eventually into Zen through the Chinese lineages, that one of the last things to go in one's practice is that sense of a self. That's one of the hardest things to get rid of, and that's why it's such a pervasive challenge for meditators.
Yeah. But once I found that self, it like became a thing for me to continually question it and examine it and say, this thing can't be real. It doesn't make any sense, because there cannot be something abstract and kind of supernatural as a focus of my being. I'm more than that. I'm a body. I'm this holistic system, not a point in space. From which all consciousness radiates. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
But even though I knew that it didn't exist, it still had resonance with me. It like you say, it's not something I could get rid of easily. I couldn't just unthink it. And I think that actually that this is what we in psychology we would call a schema, and I would call it like an existential schema. And a schema is like a template or a prism, a lens through which you view reality. And I think that one is a very powerful one that we learn early in life, and that's reinforced by our culture. So I had the schema in me, of a kind of an indestructible unitary self, and was questioning it. And then one day I was walking to work and happened to cross through the middle of the traffic circle. And for the umpteenth time, I was thinking about this self. And I remember having the thought that the fact that, I was afraid to let go of it was kind of a smoking gun, that it was probably not real, that my motivations weren't pure, in kind of maintaining it. And then, as a kind of a non sequitur, all of a sudden I had this experience. And my initial experience was that I had been in like, say like a very small silo with vertical boards, and that these boards were now falling away. So that was my initial experience of like falling away. Something was falling away from me. And this was, my Kensho experience. I think what was falling away from me was this idea of, of a self that, totally locatable and stuff.
Yeah. And again, an actual experience. This is happening to you, and you're going through all the perceptions of it. But then and truly transformative. But then you went on and did some more analysis.
Right. Well, immediately, I mean, the feeling I had was a sense of great joy, because not having this self, you lose kind of like a self-consciousness about yourself too. And I think also your superego gets deactivated in the process of this too, because that's supported by that. But immediately I felt a great joy, and that joy lasted for like 10 years. I mean, it was a long time. And the other thing that I experienced was, the oneness with all things. I guess now that I didn't have this, point in space that I call the self, myself sort of radiated into everything around me. I was everywhere, and I felt like the dirt beneath my feet was like a brother. I felt like the wind could blow through me. I was just having all these subjective feelings of, oneness with everything, and that brought a lot of joy. I also lost kind of sometimes the meaning of words, like being inside versus outside. To me, they felt like the same thing all of a sudden. There was no difference. The walls didn't really mean anything. I also became more aware of like the poetry that's in nature. Just watching a leaf fall, became like a poetic experience for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And all these things were a direct result of this Kensho experience. There's nothing that I had experienced before that. And in fact, my entire personality like changed. Before that, I was kind of brooding, self-absorbed. And afterwards, I was, totally in the world and interacting with the world and with other people. And I kind of look back at it now, and it seems like there's a veil, and the veil is the Kensho experience, and before that is my life before it, and after the veil is my life now.
Mm-hmm. So the experience itself, some of the things, if I'm hearing it right, that you came away with is that there were these perception. There's a perceptual change, and that your things fell away. What you're describing is exactly what is described in what is supposed to happen in one's progress in classical Buddhism, is that falling away of self and the arising of a great joy and the sense of interconnectedness. And where many of us and you share this, many of us as secular atheist type people, we kind of have a reflex of rejection of that kind of thing because it sounds and has the earmarks of being a mystical experience. But what we're finding, this came out in some of the discussions with Grant as well, is that the experience itself can still be beneficial, transformative. You do feel joy, you do feel this connectedness, and whether it's actual or not, isn't really relevant because it's still
Right.
positively life-altering.
Exactly. I mean, each of us has, several different ways that we can perceive the world and the universe and existence, and we have several ways that we could perceive self.
Right, right.
So, I mean, what you choose or one or the other is what works for you. It's not, what's going to bring you to more optimal psychological functioning, not.
Right, and where you and I are going with this, where a lot of us are going as secular practitioners of this, is that we're still very much naturalists. We're atheists. Everything is within this fathom-long body, and that is the early Buddhist message. There's nothing supernatural here. It's all process of
Right.
this fathom-long body, and I think we run into issues of terms and so on that push away people who otherwise wouldn't have this experience and be able to frame it as, but this is normal, natural psychological functioning. There's no woo here, and you can use that as an experience that helps you move forward. And you're taking that forward. You're using that in your studies of psychology. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, if you are a naturalist and you have an experience like this, you're going to assume that it's a natural process, that it's not supernatural. And if you make that initial assumption, then when you start examining what happened to you, as I did, then you're going to come up with psychological explanations. I think that the spiritual quest is really a psychological quest, and that as we move forward in psychology, we're going to integrate more of these, traditional like Buddhist practices, and becoming healthier psychologically. So what I came up with is a theory based on schema theory, that we have a schema, an existential schema, that defines how we perceive self and what our expression of self is, and that we can create an alternative schema, which is a more sort of distributed self. And that distributed self creates this subjective feeling of oneness and joy. So there's nothing, supernatural about that. That's something that anybody could do. And it's something that you can predict. It's something that you could, empirically test.
Yeah. Yes. Let's put it to the test. So where is it that you're in school now?
I'm in graduate school for counseling psychology. And one of the things I've been aware of is that in the past 5 or 6 years, this whole movement of positive psychology. In the past, psychologists were mostly focused on, what's wrong with people.
Yeah.
Now, right.
You don't go to a psychologist because you're feeling healthy and happy.
Right. So now we're looking at, what allows people to be happy? What are the attitudes, the values, the meanings that allow people to live a good life? And I think this sort of, psychological quest, spiritual quest is one of those ways that, you can find meaning in life, and that you can obtain, different perspectives on life as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking, with describing the experience of Kensho and the dropping away, that this is a very spiritual kind of experience, and that we as atheists can still have this spiritual experience without having it have the meaning of spirit. And this keeps coming up again and again, that you were saying that from our kind of secular standpoint, that we will find secular, it will fit our secular view, and that someone with more faith type leanings will find more mystical kinds of reasonings behind it. That's okay, as long as, what's the effect? What do you take out of it, and how do you put that into practice? And that was what what really was very telling, and why we even started the conversation, why I wanted to chat with you, is that you made that point, is it needs to be put into practice. So how are you're doing that now? You're going forward, and what plans do you have? How would you like to make that leap?
Well, I'm just kind of thinking about it. I really like the idea of positive psychology. I think that, well, let me make this point. I mean, none of us atheists really like the word spiritual. Okay?
Right.
I mean, it's a real red flag.
Yeah, it is. It's a buzzword for us.
Right. So what I would like to do is integrate and, kind of come up with theories behind these Buddhist spiritual practices, and have, the science of psychology kind of take them in and integrate them. And I think that if we do that, eventually, the word spiritual will just drop out of usage, and the only thing that'll be left is psychology. But it's going to be an expanded psychology that includes all these positive things, how to live a good life. And one of those ways to live a good life are through these Buddhist, through meditation, mindfulness, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So it's taking these experiences that people have known about for thousands of years and putting them within a context of modern interpretation of psychological functioning, such that we're not chasing away people who have a sensitivity to words like spirituality, when in fact it's something perfectly natural that would fit very well with their views. Right.
And let's be honest, not every spiritual practice is there going to be an empirical basis for. I mean, some of it we should reject, but there's a lot in there that is definitely psychologically based, and that we can integrate into a larger view of psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the experiences that one has, in particular in meditation, your mind is functioning in a different way than normal. And early Buddhism does say, question things and don't simply take it at face value, because we are fooled by ourselves, by our mind all the time. And I think it's one of the reasons that in Zen practice in particular, you come and you sit in Dokusan with the teacher and you say, oh, I had this vision of something wonderful, and you have this, you're all excited about it, and they say, okay, and so let go of that and move on and continue sitting. I think it's a perfectly valid approach to it, is that you don't want to get trapped by the experiences. You want to continue with the development.
Right, development in your continued evolution as a person.
Yes, exactly. Bhavana, development, yes.
Mm-hmm. And that evolution, that change, doesn't mean that you're sitting in a cave somewhere, meditating. It only has meaning if it has meaning for you as a human being in here and now, in the moment, in a concrete sense. And as I mentioned in that post, I mean, that's mostly, our relationships, with other people.
Yeah, exactly. The other word, it's our relationships with others. If it's just separated and only internal, although that's nice for you, everyone else has benefit to get out of this too. Excellent. Will, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an awesome talk, and I appreciate your time. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
So, you had an experience. You're religious, so you fit that experience within the context of your worldview, and it positively impacts your life and your interactions with others. So, you had an experience. You're secular, so you fit that experience within the context of your worldview, and it positively impacts your life and your interactions with others. I'm sensing a theme here. The fact is, we're all people. Well, except that one guy that went on the left there. I'm not too sure about him. And as people, we're built essentially the same way. We have different specific wiring and chemistry, and we have layers of social and cultural indoctrination on top of it, but we all work pretty much alike. Whatever explanation one chooses to put on them, these experiences are impactful on a person. They make a difference as people interact more positively with those around them. We can call it a spiritual awakening or a psychological event. The label isn't important. It's what we do with it that gives it practical, tangible use and personal meaning. Like many of you listening, I'm an atheist, and I'm secular, but I'm not anti-religious. I'm not going to discount an entire framework because parts are culturally irrelevant or wrong for modern society, or because people in that framework aren't behaving as they're supposed to. Neither am I going to buy into all aspects of that framework. Each part of it is going to get critically evaluated, and what's of value stays, and what isn't goes. I have a practice of meditation that's guided by early Buddhist thought, not because I'm dripping with faith in a dogma, but because it works. It's helped me, personally, change for the better. It's a balance between finding what is useful and what is not. That's what our critical thinking is for, neither to discount nor to blindly accept. We all do it. So changing that. What works for you? If you would like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com. Each episode has its own page with show notes, references, and links to source materials. You'll also find resources on Buddhism, critical thinking, secularism, and links to the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi. John Kaizen Neptune and Taihei Shakuhachi's websites are both linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment, every single moment, you have a choice. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.